Hi, and welcome to another episode of Walleye Chronicles, where I bring you in off the street, off the boat, off the dock, and have a conversation with you to figure out what makes you tick about fishing. What about fishing has made you want to do it every single day of the rest of your life? Today, I have a very special guest with me. I have guide, Mr. Robert Claus. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm good. How are you?
Wonderful. So, just kind of want to get in right away off the bat with you here. What growing up? What was your childhood like? Were you guys? Where'd you live? Where'd you grow up? All that kind of fun stuff.
I am a born and raised Youper. I grew up on the shores of Lake Superior for the most part. I was actually born in White Pine, lived there for a few years till I was about 3. We moved to Marquette for a while. And then somewhere around 3rd grade, moved to a little tiny town called Mass City, Michigan, which is near Ontonagon. And then lived there throughout my childhood, high school years, attended college at Michigan Tech in Houghton, graduated from there, and then finally left the UP after that.
So, what was your first
So,
experience with fishing that you can remember?
you know, I my my memories of fishing, almost all of them when I was young revolved around fishing with my dad, or fishing with either one of my grandfathers. Both were avid outdoorsmen and big fishermen, big time fishermen, along with my dad. My dad and my dad and his dad were both worked for the Michigan DNR. My grandfather was a conservation warden. My dad was a forest fire officer. So outdoors was kind of, born into us basically. It's in my blood.
Right?
They spent a lot of time outdoors. I spent a lot of time outdoors. And living in the UP in a little tiny town, we, would get done with whatever our chores were for the day and be out doing something outdoors, whether it was fishing, you know, hunting, chasing things, whatever, shooting things with BB guns, whatever we did. But as far as my memories, so I know that I've been told a story, and I somewhat have a recollection of it. Again, I was born in White Pine. My dad worked at the Porcupine Mountain wilderness area as a park ranger. He was an assistant manager up there. And for my first 3 years, my first 3 summers, we actually lived in a log cabin up at the Presque Isle unit.
Oh,
That was the
nice.
headquarters for the manager there. Yeah, so I was a little kid running around out there in a little, stroller thing or whatever, banging around the walls in the cabin. And my dad would take me down to the streams, the rivers, the little creeks, and the main river through Presque Isle there, and we, catch brook trout. And I remember as a little kid catching brook trout, and I used to like to kiss all my trout. So I kiss all my trout, and then I have a memory at a young age of looking at some trout that were baking in the oven and kissing the oven door and burning my lips. So I do have that lovely memory in my head
Hot for the
from being
trout.
aged. Yeah, yeah. But, lots and lots of memories in my youth of that from that age on up. I mean, when I got a little older, we spent all our summers, my cousin and I spent our summers living with my mom's dad, and my 2 grandfathers lived literally about a house apart in a little town called Big Bay, Michigan, near Marquette, Michigan. So we spent a lot of time fishing what's called Lake Independence. It's
Okay.
right down the street. Would bike down there and fish the shores, climb through the weeds. And it's funny because now when you go and look at it, it's all developed property, where we
Right.
used to roam when we were kids. There's houses along the lake shore. We used to jump the fence at Flurry's Mill and fish along the lake shore because there was better fish, always better fishing on the other side of a
It
fence,
always is.
right? Yeah, yeah. So we would fish over there, and then have to be careful coming back through because there was a bull. He had a bull inside the fence, and if the bull was in the field, you had to run for your life. But you know, we had all kinds of cool memories like that growing
So,
up.
what were you catching in that?
Lake Independence
Yep.
is known for its perch fishing. Smallmouth bass is good there, some walleye and northern pike. And growing up and spending my summers there with my grandfather, we chased pike. That was kind of our primary fish. And to this day, I don't actually target perch like a lot of guys because for me growing up, perch was bait. we would literally go down to the shore or go down in the morning and fish the weeds for perch. And then that perch would go in a bucket and get put below a bobber and soaked for big pike along the weed lines.
Wow.
That's what we did. Right. That's how we would go. We didn't go buy minnows. We didn't use sucker minnows or anything like that. We would go catch perch, and that was our bait. If we got a 12-inch perch, all we were thinking about was that big pike we were going to catch off that 12-inch perch.
So they're never thinking about eating that perch.
Right. There was nobody between me and my cousin and my grandfather thinking about eating perch. We were thinking about the bigger pike we could catch. So.
Wow. So did you do a lot of shore fishing going up, or was that on a boat, or kind of when was your first boat experience?
It was a mix. So my dad, my grandfather had like a 12-foot, aluminum boat. I couldn't tell you what brand. It had a little Sea King on it. We did go out, and my grandfather was a bigger guy, so he had built a center console for it, if you will. He had built a wood board with a cable steering wheel to some pulleys that would go in the oarlocks, and he would sit in the middle of the boat, and then we would ride up front or behind him, and we would take that little boat all out on Lake Independence. And then my dad had a small aluminum boat. Eventually, my grandfather upgraded to a 14-foot aluminum boat, which we would take out. And then when my grandfather passed away, that grandfather passed away when I was in like 7th grade. That boat came to our house, and then that became our primary boat. That was a 14-foot Miracraft with a 15-horse Johnson on it. Yep. And actually, all through my high school years, I would say until I was like a junior or senior in high school. I graduated in 1988, so I'm going to date myself a little bit. I'm coming up on 54 years old. But back then we didn't even have a fish finder. Nope. Most of our fishing with grandfathers and my dad was without a fish finder. I remember the first fish finder that we had. My uncle came up to visit for a summer. He lived in Illinois, and he brought his Lund up, and he had purchased a Humminbird. I think it was like a LC 3000 or 2000. I don't remember the number, but it was one of those that was like big block pixels.
Oh, yep.
So every fish was like this fish. It was like 5 blocks on the screen. Looked like Tetris.
Yep.
Great scale, obviously, and we thought that was the coolest thing ever. It would tell you the depth that the fish were at. So that year, within that year, my dad went and bought one, and we had that one on our boat to play. And over there, non-summertime, the rest of the year when I was, at home, essentially, when we fished a lot of little pothole lakes around there. Twin Lakes, growing up in Mass City, Twin Lakes, Michigan, Lake Roll and Lake Gerald were our primary two that we would chase fish on. But there's a ton of little pothole lakes, anything from brook trout to bass. As kids, we always want to catch bass because they fought harder. Yep. My dad always wanted to go sit out, and soak bobbers or fish straight off the bottom for trout in different lakes, either rainbows or brook trout that were planted in some of the lakes. And we did a ton of brook trout stream fishing as a kid growing up. So following my dad through the brush years.
So that first locator, what was the best part about it? Did you really use it for the fish you saw, or was just the depth? What made it kind of work for you guys?
Both, but we never, back then we never put 2 and 2 together. Like, oh, there's a fish down, you can see the fish on the screen. Like, we should be fishing at that depth. That was never like part of the equation. It was just a cool factor. Hey, there are fish there.
Right. Kept you there.
The screen tells us there. Right. My dad, the biggest joke that my brother and I had, and then my cousins and whoever fished in the boat with us, is my dad it was by him in the back of the boat, right? It's a tiller boat. So he had it on a little board on suction cups on the bench next to him, and a wood board with the transducer clamped to the back of the boat. Yep. But my dad would sit in the back of the boat as we were fishing and say, oh, there's a fish at 15 feet. Oh, there's one at 10 feet. Oh, there's another one. There's another one at 10 feet. Oh, one at 11 feet. And we would all just be like, really? We're not catching them, but he would just constantly call out the fish we were seeing. Yeah, didn't matter. We still ran our baits down to the bottom and lifted them up an inch or whatever, a foot. We never adjusted the slip bobbers, never adjusted whatever we were doing to target the right zone. So
a way to keep you fishing.
Absolutely, it was entertainment. Literally that fish finder was pure entertainment. And I remember my dad had that in the boat. I was just brought on to Lawrence's pro staff around 2010. And my dad still had that Humminbird, and it died. It quit working, and he was so distraught. And I bought him. We still had, I think we still had Eagle as part of the brand. I bought him an Eagle locator grayscale to put on the boat, and that thing was like, wow. He couldn't believe the difference, and he could actually understand a little more what was going on. But yeah, but that locator was around a long, long time. That thing worked. That's pretty funny.
So how was the motor? The Johnson work good for you guys, or was it a constant battle to get it started, keep it going?
Nope, that motor still runs right now today. It's in my, that boat is still sitting in my. So my dad passed away a few years ago during the COVID timeframe, but the boat still is at my mom's house, at my mom and dad's house. It's in the garage. I literally was up there a few weeks ago, doing a few things for my mom, and my brother actually took it out this summer. Didn't run it, but he took it out, cleaned everything up. But I know that engine, I bet you if you put it in the water, it would, obviously put maybe a new tank of gas on it, because it probably hasn't been run in over 2 years. But I guarantee it would start and run today. I mean, the boat, my brother's pressure washed it out. It still looks the same. It's a yellow Miracraft, 14-footer with but we did buy him an electric tiller, Minn Kota electric tiller at one point. And he thought that was the best thing since sliced bread too. You'd run around the lake with that instead of using his 15 horse, but. Yeah, but no, that boat's still sitting there. We haven't figured out what we're going to do with it yet. We kind of almost hate to get rid of it.
Yeah, you also you have to take that out, go out a couple more times.
Oh, absolutely. Sounds like my niece, my sister's youngest, is going to take the boat. She is junior in college, or almost a senior. I think she's between junior and senior, somewhere in there. But she's going to possibly take the boat over to her place in Marquette and hang on to it. And her boyfriend might use it. So
there you go, keep it the family.
Yeah, it does have another up on the locator. I bought a Lowrance Elite 7, I think, or something for it a while ago. Back maybe like 8 years ago or so.
There was a lot of those boats around. I know I grew up with one of those same boats, except ours was like the baby blue color. So
sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of those boats around. So being that you had so much access to the outdoors and family that works in the DNR, did you ever have any like free scoops of like inside information, so inside trading that you guys got to hook up on?
Not really. I mean, it was a different time back then, right? There wasn't social media, internet, all that stuff. People went out and explored and worked for their fish. Right? I mean, and fishing was fishing. It wasn't catching. Nowadays, I think that's the big expectation. Everybody has the immediate need to go out and catch. Nobody wants to go out and enjoy the day and fish. I mean, we spent countless hours sitting in the boat, either casting on a certain lake or, watching bobbers for trout with 2 or 3 bites only, and we had countless days where it was fast and furious. As soon as you drop your line down, you had it on, or, casting a shoreline for smallmouth and trying to understand that and picking up some bass or whatever, or fishing for pike, right? I mean, in the summertime with my grandfather, when you're drifting and soaking perch underneath bobbers, I mean, you had days where you caught, my most memorable day fishing on Lake Independence with my grandfather and my cousin, my cousin and I decided to invent a new style of fishing. We were hand lining for pike. So we had taken old line spools and wrapped them up with some Dacron, put a leader, steel leader on it, and we're just soaking that over the side of the boat, holding on to them as we were drifting along with a bobber and, catching pike. And we were catching pike of all kinds of sizes, up to maybe in the mid 30s inch range. And of course, back then you caught it, you kept it until you got your limit. And the memorable part of that day was my grandfather caught a 45-inch northern that day. The biggest pike I'd ever seen in my life. And that fish literally almost capsized us because it was thrashing around the boat. He literally went to net it. It broke the first net. It went through the net, got a second net, and finally got it in the boat. And again, my grandfather was a bigger guy. He used to be a semi-pro wrestler in Chicago way back in the days. And he, muscled this fish and stuffed its head under the bench. But this tail was flapping around, knocking tackle left and right in the boat. The boat was rocking. We were getting water over the sides. I mean, just everything about that's still so fresh in my mind. And I guarantee if you talk to my cousin right now that was with it, he had the same memory. It was such a vivid day, coming off the water, and everybody at the park, at Perkins Park was the boat launch, just enthralled. There was a little newspaper right up on the fish.
Wow.
Wow. Yep. And back then we didn't do mounts. Like none of us did fish mounts. What we would do with our pike is clean them, take the head off, stick it on a board, and put a piece of wood in its mouth.
Yep.
So it had that mouth, and put it out behind the house and let the hornets and the bugs pick the flesh off until you had just that skull, basically. Yeah. So that particular fish, my uncle still has it. His would be his son. My uncle has that skull still from that big fish.
Wow, that's pretty cool. We actually, growing up, we did a lot of flathead fishing, and we did the same basic thing as be hanging out behind the house for the summer.
Yep. Yeah, I got lots of. I don't have any of them. If I go to my dad's house, I guarantee if I went up in the garage attic, my mom and dad's house, there's probably a couple of those pike skulls still hanging out up there too somewhere, along with the deer racks and things. But
so, did you learn to clean pike at an early age then?
Absolutely. We learned to clean every fish at an early age. I couldn't tell you when that was offhand, but cleaning whether it was brook trout, rainbow trout, learning to fillet them if they were bigger, just taking the head and guts out if there's a little brookie, filleting pike. So I have one here. I'll show you. This was our favorite tool growing up. This is not the one I used as a kid. I found this at an antique store.
Really?
Recognize this? It's a fish scaler.
Okay.
So this is that skins it. Remember the electric skins it thing that came out a few years ago? The Takasaki was pushing. Yep. This is the old version of that.
Oh, Jesus!
You actually put your tail of the fish in here, and when you turn the roller, it pulls it through and takes the skin off. We had one of these, and we would fillet the fish, take the rib cage out, run it through that. We didn't know anything about taking the Y bones out. You just picked around them when you cooked it, on a pike.
Yep.
But walleye, we would use that, and pike that. Trout, you couldn't use it because it was skin's too soft on a trout, but typically you just leave that on anyway. But we learned how to clean everything.
So that was part of the whole process.
Absolutely, from start to finish. How to catch it, how to clean it, watching how to cook it. We didn't do a lot of deep fried fish. It was pan fried or baked.
Okay.
Pretty typical. Or throw it on a grill in tinfoil. But we didn't do a lot of deep fried stuff throughout that time frame. My dad had a electric fry pan that he would put oil in and pan fry everything. Or cast iron if we were camping or up at camp. We have a family camp property up near Big Bay still. Okay. We own several hundred acres up there. It's family deer hunting, but that property is on a little tiny feeder creek, which is one of the feeder streams to the salmon trout river up there, and that's loaded with brook trout. We have a pond. You can go up, like if you went up there this time of year, I'm sure there's brook trout in the pond, and we would go catch them off the dock. As a little kid, we'd sit off the dock, catch them in the fall, and have brook trout for breakfast. That's another memory of my dad, especially. That was a popular thing in the fall to go up there and have brook trout breakfast while you were at deer camp or deer hunting or bow hunting time or bird hunting, whatever we were doing. Yeah.
That sounds straight magical.
Yep. Cleaning. Yep.
Wow. So moving on, when you got a little older, getting to high school, did you get some freedoms when you get your car? Did you keep, do you stick kind of with sports, or did you kind of keep with hunting and fishing? Kind of where did you go once you got into high school?
I did get into sports. Track, football were the two that I played, but I still, when you're kind of ingrained into that outdoor life, it doesn't go away. We still would crave every chance to go out and either if it was bird hunt in the fall, trout fishing. Literally get your chores done, either get on your bike, take the car or take the truck. Once I was able to drive, hook up the boat, that aluminum, Miracraft, hook up the boat, go. My dad had hitches on everything. Doesn't matter if it was the boat or the cars we owned. Everything had a hitch to tow the boat. So my brother and I got in big trouble. Really, only one time. I don't recall ever getting in trouble like for a curfew or anything, except one time, and it wasn't a curfew problem. We wanted to go fish Otter Lake. It's a lake over by Houghton, Michigan, probably about a 45-minute drive from my parents' house. And it's kind of through the middle of nowhere, backwoods type. You can take paved roads to get there, don't get me wrong. But we desperately wanted to fish it in the spring. And we had fished there before with my dad. We had fished it with my uncle. But we wanted to go on our own and fish it. Big pike. One of the lures of Otter Lake, it's on the Sturgeon River, is big pike. Okay. And that was one of my favorite things to chase growing up, even through college and even my first, few years out of college. If there was a lake that had big pike in it, I wanted to find it and chase big pike. And we hooked up the car. I think it was our station wagon, and to the boat, and took off. And it might not have been the station wagon, but it doesn't matter. It was a car. It wasn't the truck, because my dad had the truck at work. We took off and went to Otter Lake and fished, and we were fishing longer than we were supposed to be fishing. So we decided to take what we know is there's a shortcut to come home, which is not paved roads. And this is in the spring, in the UP where there's still snow in the woods a little bit type, maybe it wasn't snow, but a lot of mud, saturated ground. And we took the boat and station wagon off-roading to take the shortcut to get home. And just driving and not paying attention to what it looked like until we got out of the vehicle in the driveway and realizing what we had done. That yellow boat was completely brown from top to bottom inside. The station wagon was mud. I mean, there's a lot of clay up there. So just clay and mud. And my dad came, we couldn't get the boat cleaned fast enough for him before he got home. And we got in deep, deep trouble for behind with the boat in the car.
You guys catch fish that day?
Yes, we did. I don't recall catching anything major monstrous that, stuck out in my head, but we absolutely caught some fish. Yep.
So when did you kind of switch over to fishing walleyes? Or was it always something there, just wasn't the main part of what you were doing?
No, it's interesting. I mean, we did catch walleye growing up, throughout, being a young kid, high school, college. In college, I didn't drop off from fishing, but it wasn't as major of a focus. Obviously, my summers. So I actually worked a lot of my summers in college as a park ranger myself for the Michigan DNR at a state park, Twin Lakes State Park. So I would bring the boat with me to work if I was not working like a third shift, and I'd go fish after work because I'm right there on the lake.
Yep.
So I still did a lot of fishing through college. During the college year, fall, winter, spring, I didn't do a lot of ice fishing unless I was home for a weekend. Did some hunting, but once I got out of college, I left the UP. I went to work in Lower Michigan near Saginaw Bay for about 2 years. And over there, I started to, over there you hear about walleye fishing a lot, right?
Yep.
I was near Frank's Great Outdoors, which is a huge bait shop, huge place. Anybody's ever been over there has been in Frank's. Spent countless hours in there, just like I would in a Fleet Farm or any other bait or the Reel Shot, anything like that, because it was such a huge place.
Yep.
And I lived probably about 30 minutes from Frank's. So, I heard more about walleye fishing. I did a little bit of ice fishing for walleye at the time over there, walking out. Really, I didn't have an ATV snowmobile or anything. In my 2 years there, I didn't. That was probably my biggest break from a lot of fishing. Was about the 2 years I worked in Lower Michigan. I did some hunting, but we worked where I worked at my engineering job. There was probably 60 hours plus a week, so I didn't have a ton of time to get out, and explore. But I did some. But that's when I first started to think a little more about walleye fishing. When I first moved to Wisconsin, I literally moved from the Saginaw Bay area to Door County. I lived in Sturgeon Bay for 2 years when I first moved to Wisconsin. And that up there is, of course, what triggered more thought about walleye. But I actually became addicted to smallmouth fishing in Door County before I became addicted to walleye fishing there.
That's easy
I'm
to
gonna
do
be
up
honest.
there.
It is easy to do. And back then it was a little different. It wasn't I mean, it's always been a great smallmouth fishery. Now it's literally world class. Back then you'd go out and have 100 fish days, but your average size fish was probably 3 pounds. Now you may not have a 100 fish day, but your average size is 5 pounds.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's the guys that I know that target them heavily up there now, that, you know, you're talking seven, if they don't get a 7 pound fish in the spring in the boat every time they're guiding, it's you know, not a good day.
That's crazy.
Back then 5 pounders were the, you know, 5 pounders were the goal. But I became addicted to that. But I did realize that the walleye fishing was there, and I did target Larson's Reef, you know, stuff like that. When I lived there for 2 years, I had a very similar boat. It was my buddy's boat from Green Bay. He never used it. I borrowed it for 2 years. It was in my garage for 2 years. A little 14-foot mirror craft rigged up with an electric motor. I think that had an old Chrysler engine on it. It was kind of a piece of crap, never hardly ran. I fished with that for a couple of years. And I did spend a lot of weekend time exploring other inland bodies of water in Wisconsin. Taylor County, Vilas County, we would go camping with my cousin and her husband and do a lot of fishing up there. That's when I discovered the Mississippi River. My cousin fished over there, and in that time frame I kind of fished for everything, really. Yep. But I never really had this walleye addiction back then. It was kind of multi-species in general. Whatever was biting, I was going to chase it. You know, whether it was big pike, salmon, you know, smallmouth at the time, you know, and walleye here and there. At some point, I had a switch went off, and I don't know what it was. I feel like it wasn't one specific thing. For me, it was more about the challenge. Like, walleye presented a challenge because they seemed like it was harder to catch them consistently. And I've always been a student of the game, of fishing, right? Ever since I was a kid. Absorb it, learn it. I'll tell you straight up, I feel like I'm not the best fisherman on the block. There are guys that it comes somewhat natural to, that I've fished with over the years, you know, big names, some small names. I got lots of buddies who are just, you put them in the boat, they're going to catch the biggest fish anywhere near the boat for whatever reason, right? I've always felt I needed to stay on top of my game, learning, absorbing, and trying to, you know, practice what I'm learning and be a student of the game that way for my craft. And at some point, you know, I had this switch. It went off, said walleye are the challenge that I want to take on, because the bass became easier, right? I was chasing smallmouth a bunch. Pike, you go near the weeds, you catch some pike, you know, it was, but walleye, it's like they were a little more elusive, and I wanted to dive into that world more. And that's what kind of took over for me, was like, okay, I want that challenge. I want to figure them out on every possible season, winter, spring, summer, fall, because you can chase them all year round here, right? There's no stopping. You can keep going. And I wanted to learn as much as I could and absorb it and try to practice that. So that's kind of what happened with me.
So you obviously you spent time as an engineer, but you also guide. Mm-hmm. When is it growing up with your dad being in the parks and all that kind of stuff that made you want to be in the outdoors industry as well? Or what kind of made you kind of push towards being a guide and doing that daily-ish?
The guide part, because I enjoyed, again, I was trying to absorb and learn and practice what I was getting, right, the education I'm getting, and whether it was reading a magazine, watching a video, you know, it wasn't internet back then, or it wasn't social media, or fishing with buddies, trying to learn, absorb, and then relay that to my own fishing. I realized that I enjoyed teaching that also. I enjoyed taking a guy from the office out who, you know, say, oh man, I've gone to Winnebago. I only caught like 2 fish. I don't get it, you know, and like, oh, hey, I got a pretty good technique on Winnebago. Why don't you come with me? Let's go fish. Right. And realized pretty quickly by doing that I seem to have a pretty natural ability to be able to teach that to people. Teach them not just go out and catch fish, but why I'm catching them, why the fish are there, why we're doing what we're doing, and passing that knowledge on. And that became key for me, you know, the knowledge part of it, being able to pass on what I've learned. And I'm still learning every day on the water. You have to be able to learn, you know, what's going on around you, because everything changes, right? But just being that part of it for me was a hook. I got caught in enjoying passing on my knowledge. And that's what triggered me to say, well, I want to be a guide, looking into it. And I, when I bought my first bigger boat, if you will, because I went from that little boat, that Miracraft that I borrowed, to like a 17-foot, little deeper V tiller to get out and explore a few more things.
Yep.
And then I bought a 20-foot walleye boat. I joined the Sheboygan Walleye Club shortly after, started networking with a ton of different people, from tournament guys to guides, just really good sticks throughout the state of Wisconsin, and, bringing in those relationships from other guys and girls, and realizing that there was a lot more out there, that you can get, bigger boat, you can explore more, bigger water. My first big boat was a 20-foot Tracker Tundra. Great ride. I had plenty of little problems with the boat, but we're not going to get into that detail. But I had that Tundra for a lot of years. I had a good friend that used to work at Mercury. Now he works with Polaris. He was an engine geek, worked at Merc Racing, hooked me up with the engine. So I actually bought that Tundra with no motor on it from the factory. I bought an engine from him, a power head and a lower unit, and we put it on in his garage.
Wow.
So my first big boat was built in somebody's garage like that. Correct. Yep. So, and then after a year of running it with 150 horse, and he called me up and said, hey, I got a 200 horse. If you want it, we can swap out your power head. So I went in and we swapped out the 150 for a 200, and I drove around cowling that said 150 horse on it with a 200 horse under the cowling for several years with that boat. I mean, the boat was rated for 200, so it wasn't overpowered, but
That's crazy.
and then finally expanded from that. I jumped into the R-Craft and haven't looked back. But it's just when I got that 17-footer and explored more is when I thought to myself, man, I started to fish a couple tournaments, started to realize that I enjoyed teaching people and taking people out. Once I got the Tundra, that's when it's really clicked that I could really do this and take people out. I just finished, this is the end coming, as we move into winter. Yep. This is the end of my 16th year of being a guide. So I've been doing it for quite a few years. Some people don't realize that, but yeah, I'm old. I've been around doing this for 16. I've been in Wisconsin for 30 now, 30 years here. So
going back a little bit again, let's get back to the childhood just a little bit. What do you, bait shops. You remember any bait shops as a kid growing up, little hole in the wall places that have any fond memories of, or the first lure you bought with your own money you saved up?
Interestingly enough, so we didn't have a lot of little bait stores around. It was the gas stations that had some tackle. That kind of stuff was always there. Walmart had tackle. Obviously, not Walmart, Kmart. Yep. Kmart had tackle. You go there. But our favorite tackle store to visit, where I bought my first lures, was the PX on the K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base. So my grandfather, yeah, I know, right? People always do that. My grandfather was retired Navy. Okay. And had access to go on base. We did all our grocery shopping on base. Like, my grandfather would take us every week, once a week, when we stayed with him in the summer, put us in the vehicle, in the truck, and we actually rode in the back, in the bed with the topper. There was a mattress back there. We'd ride in the back of his Ford F-150, and he'd drive, and we'd go from Big Bay to K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base.
How things have changed.
And Right. Our highlight was to go there and buy fishing tackle. They had pretty much all the basics there, and you could buy anything at the PX, and it was dirt cheap. And we would save up our pennies that we would get and buy lures. Mostly it was MEP spinners and daredevils, or steel leaders and hooks for fishing for pike. Yep. MEP spinners for trout stream stuff, and then daredevils for casting, and then big steel leaders and hooks for pike. And bobbers, big bobbers. We didn't want little bobbers. We bought big bobbers, So that's what we did,
So the only bluegill or panfish you did as a kid was basically to catch bait.
Yeah, correct. I don't recall ever growing up fishing for, bluegill, crappie, panfish of any kind. We'd catch some rock bass. We'd throw them back. You'd get a bluegill once in a while around brush piles if you were fishing, but we never kept them. It's funny. Which is funny because, later in life, my dad, when he retired, spent a lot more time chasing panfish at times in some of those lakes, because there are good crappie and bluegill fishing in a lot of those lakes.
Right.
You know, he would go out and do that and catch lots and lots of nice panfish. But you know, growing up, we never bothered with any of that little stuff. I'm telling you, pike, man, big pike is where it's at.
So did you guys ever fish muskies at all? Or, I mean, now you obviously guide up in Green Bay, and muskie in Green Bay is a pretty big thing. So did you guys ever get into muskies, or just they weren't around, or?
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of musky lakes really around. So Twin Lakes is known for having tiger muskies in it, and we would cast a little bit for them, but it was never a primary thing. There was better bass fishing and better walleye fishing, and trout fishing in Twin Lakes than muskies, especially tigers. I'd be surprised if they quit stocking them years ago. There's probably none left in that lake.
Oh.
But we'd see them once in a while, and you get excited. But it was never we were more in tune with trying to catch big pike in some of the lakes that had pike in them versus the muskies. And there weren't a lot of musky lakes around us growing up, so
okay,
just wasn't in our. Yep.
So so you get out of college, you come back to Wisconsin, you start fishing more walleyes. What was it, a friend, or what kind of got you into doing tournaments?
It was so I was in Sturgeon Bay, right? I lived in Sturgeon Bay, and the big thing up there was the Sturgeon Bay Open Bass Tournament. Every spring I would, when it was the 2 years I lived there, it was like, what's this deal? You go down and there's 200 boats, and I knew there were smallmouth around. We were catching them, but what clicked for me was I was fishing. I think it was the second year I lived in Sturgeon Bay. We were out fishing the same day as the Sturgeon Bay Open, and we were catching nice smallmouth too. And I told my girlfriend at the time, I'm like, you know what? We should get in this tournament because we could do this. Now I'm sitting in a 14-foot aluminum boat with a 15-horse engine, right? I'm like, we could do this. I feel like we could do this. And talked about that for about another year or two. Moved to Green Bay, and right after I moved to Green Bay is when I bought my 17-foot tiller. So it was probably 2 years after I'd said that to myself, and you know what, we should get in it. Let's do it. I had some friends that were bass fishermen up there, and didn't really have a network. I had some buddies that fished all over the place, but said, I'm going to do it. So her and I actually entered that tournament and fished it out of my 17-foot boat, which was a huge eye opener, because our pre-fishing consisted of fishing like by the Stone Quarry a little bit and Sawyer Harbor and the channel. And day one of the tournament, we're struggling. We're like, I don't know, we got like 1 3-pound smallmouth, and we come to weigh in, and there's all these guys pulling baskets, and back then 18 pounds a day was probably going to get you a check, right? 18 19 pounds a day. The guys are pulling these big bags of fish out, and we're like, wow, where are we missing this boat somewhere? I don't get it. So day two, we decided to explore, and not that I hadn't fished it before. I'd certainly fished like Riley's Bay, Sand Bay a little bit, and Little Sturgeon, but I'd never been from downtown there. I'd launched there and fished locally a little bit. Yep. I said, let's do it. So we left right downtown launch, and we motored all the way down to Sand Bay on day two of that particular tournament, and found a bunch of fish shallow and beat up on them, and came in with like 18 pounds for ourselves on the second day. And that whole event is what flipped for me and said, you know what? I think I want to fish more tournaments, and that tournament, I started, bass, right? I started poking at a couple other little bass tournaments, did the Sturgeon Bay Open religiously for 7 out of 8 years in a row. I fished it with a buddy of mine, fished it with my uncle a couple times. I fished it with my buddy that worked at Mercury, the motorhead guy. And a lot of people know him. His name's Jim Barzak. A lot of the guys at the Real Shot, and I know Kyle Carpenter knows Jim. Jim's still pretty prominent in the bass stuff. He lives up in Minnesota now. But Jim and I fished together out of his Allison bass boat. That was a crazy experience that was my first experience going 85 miles an hour in a single console bass boat from Sturgeon Bay all the way up to Ephraim. That was fun.
Did you have anything on to protect yourself?
Absolute sunglasses. And there was a bug hatch.
Oh.
So you can imagine what my looked like when we got up there. Yeah, it was crazy. But that's what got me going. The other thing that kind of hooked me into tournaments was I joined an organization which is no longer around called Pike Masters. This is back in the early days of Lake Link. There was a group of people on there talking about pike fishing, and of course that was my thing growing up as a kid, and I always loved pike. And so I joined this group called Pike Masters. Oops, oh, I got a weird call coming in. There we go. So I joined Pike Masters, and they had a couple tournaments. One in the UP. They had one here in Sturgeon Bay, which was some guys from the Great Lakes Sport Fishermen helped organize. So I did a few of those too, the Pike Masters tournaments. And I met a guy by the name of Jason Narotsky doing a Pike Masters tournament. He and a group of guys on Lake Link used to religiously fish the Larson's Reef area for walleye, especially at night. They all had cabins in Little Sturgeon. And I kind of started networking a little bit with those guys, met them, started networking a little bit on the water with them. And then Jason and some of those guys came and fished that Pike Masters tournament. And after that, I joined the Sheboygan Walleye Club. And shortly after I hit up Jason, he was looking for a new tournament partner and said, hey, we should get together and fish the club tournaments and maybe fish a few other tournaments.
Yep.
And that's what kind of started the whole thing. So, and Jason and I still fish together. We still fish Sheboygan Walleye Club. We always try to fish the Cabela's National Championship, the NTC every year together. But since then I've had tons and tons of other partners. But that's kind of what sparked it all, was just bass fishing, and then that Pike Masters, getting involved in that competitive side of things. And I never won the Sturgeon Bay Open. Never even came close.
Do you still fish
Had
it?
some good days of fishing. Butts kicked.
Do you still fish it?
Mm-mm.
No.
I haven't fished it in a long, long time. Matter of fact, the last time I fished it was out of my Tundra. I've never fished it out of one of my Yardcrafts. So it's been a long time since I fished it. I keep telling myself I should get back in and do it again just for fun, but
It looks like a lot of fun.
I haven't. It is. Yeah. I always enjoyed it. I actually don't really bass fish much anymore. Very little.
For the full version of this podcast, check out Fix TV. And remember, follow me on the talk at Smile and Fish and everywhere else at Matt Snell.